the extent of the beauty and the magnificence of that space was just nothing. Nothing in this world can compare to it. And he put me down on the sand. You'd swear, I'm coming from a tropical land. You'd swear I'd never seen sand, never touched sand, never played in sand. I was squishing my toes in the sand like it was the first time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the channel within. Today, I'm excited to be speaking with Debbie Ali about her near death experience. I'm Mira, and welcome, Debbie. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So, Debbie, do you want to talk about your life before the ND a little bit to give some context and background?
Sure. Well, I'm originally from Trinidad, which is, pretty tiny island in the Caribbean. And so, as a teacher, I've been teaching for a very long time. At that time, that was my occupation, and I led a very simple life. I mean, my kids were very young at the time, 8 and 6 respectively, and it was just a very private life that my family led. It was just me and my brother and I, no more siblings. My parents were alive. And I just basically, basic housewife kind of thing and working, sorting my kids out. That was my priority, my kids, still is really. And I'd grown up in the Presbyterian church. And the only thing that I knew was that I loved Jesus. There were many gaps in the Presbyterian way of teaching about Christianity and what it means to be a Christian. And so there were many gaps, but the only thing that I was really sure about in my life was one, my love for my children, and of course, my love for Jesus. So I grew up as a Christian. I never deviated from my faith at all. Um, but, things changed in terms of intensifying my faith after the abduction and my NDE, of course, where I met with the Lord and walked with him and talked with him. And it was just unreal, unreal. So incidentally, the abduction took place on my birthday in December. And again, fortunately, my children were not at home at the time. They'd been out with their dad looking for, presents and all that. And I was at home alone, minding my business, doing my little cleaning. My garage door was open. Um, and oops. And I was not fully safe because I knew there, was a period of time in Trinidad where abductions were pretty prevalent. So I knew it was not the wisest thing to do. However, there were a lot of people, around and about. When I say people, my neighbors, friends, and that kind of thing. So I felt relatively safe having that door open. When I noticed they started leaving, going about their shopping or whatnot, um, I moved to shut the door and take my stuff inside. And in a matter of seconds, Mira, like mere seconds, I don't know where these two men came from. They entered the garage. I couldn't even think. And, that was it. The gun was at my head. And um, as I later learned, they were actually parked around the corner of my house. So they were like right there all the time. Nobody knew. Because there were large trees for privacy and all of that, but now I look at large trees in a very different light. Privacy, but also a hiding place for criminals. And yeah, they took me. They robbed the house, of course, taking everything of any material value. Um, I was hogtied in my son's room, and while they proceeded to rob the house, and I was just praying. I was just from the time the gun was at my head, I just kept saying, Jesus, 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 Jesus. Oh my God, Jesus, let's just let this be a robbery and nothing else. But of course, they took me as well. And yeah, the first stop they made, um, was somewhere in a well-known criminal slash gang area. And I was crying, I was screaming, I was trying to get out the car. When I realized that this was not just a robbery, I started to put up a fight. Um, and the first stop again was in this space, this area, which is riddled with gang activity. Of course, I was blindfolded, mask over my head, so I could see nothing. And I was thrown into a hole in the ground that was filled with, garbage and old appliances and that. You could smell the rot. You could smell the stuff, and it was not, I was badly injured, because when I say I was thrown into the ground, I was very literally thrown in. There was no buffer. I had no idea that I was going to be 6 feet into some hole, or 6 or 7 feet maybe. Um, I stayed there. That's where I was handcuffed and so on, and I was made to sit there for the rest of the day. When it was nightfall, I was dragged up out of the hole and taken to my first location, which was some little shack on uh on a hilly area. That's as much as I could tell because I was tired, I was blindfolded. Of course, the trauma of and the beatings that I had received so far, I was just too weak to really articulate anything as such. I was just praying that, you know, my children were okay, that my husband was okay, that my dad, my mom, that they were okay. Um, but I was made to walk uphill to this little shack where, of course, having been thrown into a hole and beaten and all of that, there were, bruises and scratches and whatnot. And these men forced me to strip and bathe out in the open in front of them. And their reason was, well, Mrs. Ali, you have bruises. We don't want them infected because we have to keep you alive for now. Of course, I refused. Some good that did because that got me another beating, and they were ripping off my clothes anyway. Um, so dehumanizing is, a mild phrase to describe that experience. After that, I was thrown into this room, given somebody else's clothes to wear, and I was handcuffed to a small bed, and they went out to negotiate for a ransom, which of course we did not have. You know, we were not wealthy. We're still not wealthy. We were working class people, my husband and I. I mean, you have young kids, your family is now growing. You have a mortgage, loans, etc. They had no concept of that. So while they were beating me for information and thinking that I was lying, I was like, but no, we have no money. We don't have, at least not that kind of money. Um, they didn't believe me. Um, but they called my husband, whatever. He says, well, we don't have that money. We just don't, right? And they were very upset. They were very upset. And um, that rage was vented on me. So when one of the kidnappers came back, he was mad. He started trashing the room and, your husband is crazy and you're with us. Um, and I couldn't speak really. I mean, I was just thoroughly traumatized by everything. And that's when, he let me know, well, okay, we know it's your birthday. And now it's time for your birthday gift. And that's when I was raped the first time. So yeah, that happened. I fought, I cried, I screamed, I did everything I could. Very petite person. And these men were like, in excess of 6 feet and, big, muscular. I couldn't fight. I was beaten, I was choked. I was in and out of consciousness, essentially. And, when he was done, that was it. And I couldn't even cry after that. I just kind of curled up in a ball and stayed there. Um, but I was badly wounded in that assault. And the next thing you know, it's early into the next morning, and they moved me to another kind of shack, which is where I remained for the rest of the 2 weeks that I was held. So 13 days at the next spot where this man was like a beast. He was like, I mean, really huge, like giant. And he dragged me out of the car by my neck and had me in like a chokehold kind of thing. And I was off the ground, right? That's how large this individual was. And he was referred to as the keeper because it was his job to keep me alive, essentially. Um, he dragged me inside and he said, if you make a sound, I'll snap your neck. I didn't have no reason to doubt him. He was massive and strong. I mean, and that's when I was on this platform of some sort, and I was suspended from the air by my handcuffs, like with a dog chain kind of thing. And he was grilling me for information about salaries and savings and whatever. And I answered the best I could. I was telling him the truth, which was, we don't have any money to pay you. Um, and the more often that I would say that, the more I would be beaten by this man until I passed out. I can't even tell you how many times I was unconscious. I lost count. And the last time when I passed out, I think he may have gotten a little bit scared. Well, okay, the hostages. Remember, I'm a package to be exchanged for money. I'm not a human being. I think he might have been a little bit afraid that I was, dead. So he took me down and slapping water on my face to wake. I woke up and he took me inside of this very tiny, unventilated room, and I was handcuffed on my right side to a bedpost. Um, and that's where I remained. So I was thoroughly, thoroughly battered at that point, bleeding, badly injured, crying. I started back crying, and um, yeah, and then he came in sometime early into the next morning, the following morning, when, it was a little bit chilly, in Trinidad around that Christmas time. It gets a little chilly early morning, and I was shivering, and he came into the room that I was in and just asked what, like, what? All that I said was, I'm cold. That's all I said. I'm cold. And his response was, well, I'll get you warm. And that led to the second rape. Again, I fought, I cried, I begged, I did everything I could to fight. And again, I was choked and choked and choked repeatedly until I was in and out of consciousness during that assault. Um, and again, it was just, I kept telling myself, this is not me. That's not happening to me. I'm looking at this happen to somebody who looks like me, but it's not me. It didn't really sink in until maybe 2, 3 days after that happened to me. I grew up in a very conservative household. I married my first boyfriend. I did not know about, I never engaged with the other side of life, if you want to say, um, put it that way. So to me, that was like one of my biggest fears. Something like that happening to me, Debbie. I did all the right things. I didn't break the rules, listened to my parents for the most part. um, I went to school, I came back home, church activities, school activities, and that was it. No parties, no boys, nothing, you know. What did I do to deserve that? Right. And then later on, again, very early into the next morning, he just came in the room again and raped me again. And I mean, I fought the best I could, but by then I was so delirious with pain and starvation, dehydration, choking, whatever, beatings. I you know, um, there's little I could do. But I fought the best I could. And after that, I just kind of curled up in a ball and remained there. I threw up many times. I went into shock. I know I went into shock at least 3 times. Meanwhile, he's trying to get me to drink water or juice and eat something. And I mean, who can eat or, or drink or even think about themselves at that point in time? And everything just came back up. I was just throwing up. And the more often I would throw up, the more angry he would become because he needed to keep me alive, you see. After a few days of that, I eventually started sipping, a little bit of water and whatnot, and um, trying to digest what was happening. And I was not given any information. So did not know what was happening on the other side with my husband, with negotiations, with my children, nothing. I knew nothing. I was just there, isolated, um, lost to the world, as I put it in my book. I was just lost to the world. And yes, there were people pleading for my safe release and all of that, but we all know after a few days or a week, nobody cares. Everybody forgets. And they move on to the next victim or the next person who was uh, hurt or harmed in any way. And I was forgotten. Police were not actively looking for me either. Supposedly, no one saw or witnessed anything. I do not believe that because the area I lived in, very populated residential area, many housewives, at home. I don't believe that no one saw anything, but that's another story. Um, in any event, I kept praying and I kept praying. That's all I could have done. I couldn't move. I couldn't, all I could do was pray. And I was really, really angry with God. How could you let this happen to me when, as a little girl, I promised to love you and do whatever you wanted for the rest of my life? And I kept to that promise. And after a while of, why me, all of this, I got to the point where, okay, Lord, this is the way you want it to be. If this is how I'm supposed to die and go out and all of that, okay, I'll accept it. And as soon as I came to terms with that fact that I had no control and that if this is what the Lord wanted, I was in agreement with it. And that's when the Lord started to move. And I always describe this as Daniel in the lion's den. I was there with this man who was a stone cold murderer. He admitted to me in those words, okay? Started telling me who he killed and when and in what manner. And like, I didn't ask for that information. He just told me. And this man he changed like that. He started to take what I would call almost a genuine interest in my well-being. And of course, initially I thought, okay, well, he has to take care of me. So it doesn't mean he actually cares. Until we started having these discussions about God and politics and all kinds of stuff. And he took a particular interest in my faith in Jesus and why I was still believing in God at all. And because, look at the situation I was in. And he argued his points back and forth. And I'm like, no, I don't care what you do to me. I will always love him. And nothing can change that. And he started asking more and more questions. And so essentially, in a nutshell, I started teaching him what I knew about Jesus and the love of Christ and the love of God. And after a few days, well, of those kinds of talks, whenever I was able to speak, um, he asked if I hated him. And I always, always say this. It was never me in that situation. That was all God through me. Because human me, Debbie, would not say, No, I don't hate you. Look at what he did to me. They basically ruined my life, right? But the Lord had me say, Well, no, I don't hate you. I did not come to this earth to condemn. I came to save. And that he couldn't wrap his head around that kind of talk because in his world, he grew up as a young boy in gangs. So it was all about hate and guns and robberies and whatever. And his philosophy in life was basically if someone has what you want and you don't have it, then take it by any means necessary. And here he was encountering somebody who was teaching him about love of Christ that he had never heard before. You wouldn't think that in that time or now, or even before, that people would not know about Jesus, but he didn't. And I taught him the best I could about what I knew. And eventually, this stone cold murderer begged for my forgiveness, crying, kneeling before him because I was laying on this little bed type thing. And he was just kneeling there and holding my hand and begging me to forgive him for what he did to me and my family by extension. And I forgave him and I really, really, truly did. He could not understand that. And again, I repeated to him, the Lord did not come to the earth to condemn, but to save. So how can I hate you? The same God that created me created you. I'm not condoning what you did. I'm not saying it's a good thing or I like it or I agree with it. But who am I to judge? It's for God to judge. And eventually he asked if he can refer to me as his friend. And I'm like, well, why? It's like then he admitted, he said, I'd never had a friend before. He has all these people that he does his things with, but nobody ever spoke to him the way I spoke to him. And when I said yes, he was so happy. And he wanted to let me go. And of course, in my mind, I'm like, okay, trick or not trick or whatever. Eventually, one day, he came in and said, you know what, friends don't treat their friends like this. I'm going to clear the hill, whatever that meant. I'm going to clear this area, average around 15 or 20 minutes, and just run. Now, of course, even if I wanted to, I could not have. I was terribly weak, battered, beaten, traumatized. I hadn't walked in what, over a week. I had not walked. So how was I able to run? How was I going to just run? Um, but I was just in shock. He took off the handcuffs, tie straps, everything, and he left. And I'm like, what do I do? Right? No, it's half of my brain is like, run. And the Lord's voice came through loud and clear, like, Debbie, don't move. And I'm like, okay, why? And the Lord is like, well, if you leave, they will kill him. Now, the normal average person will say, well, okay, right? He is a murderer. Look at what he did to your life. Why should you care? But the Lord was, I did not send you here to condemn a man to death. Do you want his blood on your hands? I'm like, no, Lord. He said, then stay. And I stayed. And the keeper came back and he was mad. Oh my gosh, he was mad. He said, I cleared the way. All you had to do was go. I said, but they would have killed you. And he's like, and you care? Why? And I'm like, well, the Lord said to stay put because he did not send me here to judge you and condemn you to death. And he refused to handcuff me back and tie me up and stuff like that. And I said, listen, if anybody else comes in here and I am like loose, they're gonna kill us both. So very reluctantly, he handcuffed my wrist back to the bed, but very loosely. And he promised to protect me. That same man promised to stand between whoever he was working with and me and promised me I would go home to my children. I had no reason to believe him, but I believed in the Lord. And that was the most important thing. Now, by then, unknowing to me, my file had moved from anti-kidnapping to homicide. So they were looking out for my body to turn up someplace, essentially, because hostages are not kept more than 4 or 5 days. They're not kept alive, I should say. Beyond that, they're, wiped out, right? Because up until that point, no ransom had been paid. My husband had been trying to raise money and people were donating and all. We cleaned out the bank accounts we had and everything to try to raise some money. And anyway, eventually, I was praying, I was hoping, I put everything in the Lord's hands, but my body was shot. My body was like done with the trauma of everything that had happened, starvation and dehydration. Not that food was not offered to me. I could not eat. I could not keep anything down, right? Um, I would say maybe about 3 days before I was eventually released. I just, I was really tired, really tired. Not that I wasn't tired every other day because I was, but I was lacking sleep as well, right? But I just felt really, really sleepy, but in a strange kind of way. I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna take a nap. Who takes a nap while they're a hostage? But I remember thinking that, right? And I felt myself drifting off to sleep, but what I did not realize is that I was not falling asleep. I was dying. And the next thing I knew, like in the blink of an eye, I'm over my body. And I'm like, what the hell? I'm here. Okay, and I'm trying to work the math, and I'm like, this is, how can I be here and be there at the same time, right? And I'm just like, I go down, I floated down, I'm not really knowing that I'm floating down. I'm looking and I'm like, that's me. That's my foot. Those are my, I recognize myself. I saw the room, everything that was in the room, my position, the mask, the handcuffs, everything. I saw everything. And I looked at my chest. My chest was not moving. I put my finger, I'm like, okay, there's no breathing going on. Like I'm dead, right? But it was not in a fearful way. It was not like panic. I was totally calm. Okay. And before I could think another thought, there's this incredible white light on my left, and I could look directly at it. No squinting, nothing, no pain in the eyes, nothing. I just turned and I looked at that light, and out of it stepped Jesus. And I was so humbled to be in his presence. Like I was just, there was an instant knowing. Like I didn't need to look at him and examine, like, who are you? And I just knew that was him. And I was like, Lord, I just said Lord, and I dropped to my feet. Sorry, I dropped to the ground at his feet. And I was just looking at his feet. To me, I spent like forever just looking at his feet and the light that was emanating from it. And I felt like I dared not look at his face. Like I should not try to look at his face, or like I'm not worthy, to look at his face. I'm like, so I could have stayed there, Mira, for the rest of eternity and been totally happy. And even now that I'm back on this earth, I always say, Lord, I don't need no crowns. I don't need a golden house with golden. I don't need it. Just let me back next to your little toe, and I will be so happy. Because there was this bliss and this peace and this indescribable joy that is unmatched. And that's all I needed. And that's all I want. That's all I need right now. Coming back to this world was very, very difficult. Um, and I could see his toes, and I was just so happy to be at his toes, and he lifted me. Now from there on out, everything was all communication was telepathic. And I always tell people it was not that I couldn't speak out loud the way I'm speaking now. I could have, but there was no need to. I thought that a question, he responded telepathically as well. And he could have responded by speaking, but he didn't need to. There was no need. There was no need to eat or sleep or exercise or any of those things. You could, but there was no need to. And he lifted me up. He had my shoulders and very gently he lifted me up and he said, "It's okay now. It's all right. It's all over. You can rest." And I remember feeling so relieved that I could rest. And he cradled me as an adult, just like that, just like a baby. And man, that was, I just snuggled. I snuggled on him and I slept. Best sleep of my life. When I woke up, I was on the beach in heaven. There was no asking a question. I knew where I was. And maybe it was the beach for me because I had always loved the beach growing up in Caribbean Island. I mean, come on, you're always at the beach, right?
Yeah. So, Debbie, before the beach and with that experience of Christ, were you in another realm or were you still here?
I don't know. I think maybe I was somewhere in between.
Okay.
All that I know is that he appeared above where I was floating above my body. And when he picked me up, that was it. I just slept and I woke up on the beach. It could have been in between. Um, but I was like a little baby over his shoulder. I was looking around and like in absolute wonderment. And I always describe this earth as barely even a shadow of what is real. And what I describe as real is what I saw. The extent of the beauty and the magnificence of that space was just nothing. Nothing in this world can compare to it. And he put me down on the sand. You'd swear, I'm coming from a tropical land, you'd swear I'd never seen sand, never touched sand, never played in sand. I was squishing my toes in the sand like it was the first time. Because the sand was not sand. The sand, the grains were actual crystals. Now, my eyesight was such, all of my senses were like amplified 10.0, right? So I could see the grains of sand and I could see each grain was a crystal, but it was not hard or harsh or sharp. And I wiggled my toes in and dug a hole. This is something I like to do. I always like to dig holes in the sand with my toes. And I did that and I stooped down and I could have looked at every grain of crystal sand. And I would have spent all eternity admiring each one because every one was different. And even the sand exuded a kind of energy I could not explain. And, at that time, I'm not even thinking about my family, my children, or anything. I was just overwhelmed by this experience. And I was there playing in the sand, and Jesus was kind of laughing at me because, it's kind of like when you take your baby to the beach for the first time and they experience it for the first time. And as a parent, you're like enjoying their joy. He was like that. And I noticed oh my God, the water. That's when I observed the water. 'Cause I love water. I have an actual connection with water for some reason. Always have. And I looked at the ocean and the blues. I tried to find those shades of blue here, did not find it. Does not exist on the earth. And I'm looking out, past the horizon, and I could see the life. I could see the fish, the different colors, the different sizes, their skeletons, what they were eating, the grass, the everything. I could see everything as though it was right here. And they were all moving, and there was a different joy in the water. There was a joy in that life. And the funny thing was, as we were walking along the beach, as we walked, the water would stop its movement. Um, the ripples would stop exactly where Jesus walked. Now, as we know, that's scientifically impossible because the water is always moving. The fish are always moving. The aquatic life stopped movement where Jesus passed. The water stopped movement where he passed. And I was just in awe. How is that? I'm asking myself, well, how is that possible? And again, telepathically, Jesus was like, everything must stand still in my space or wherever I am. And I was like, wow, that's so incredible. And then he'd take two steps forward and the movement would resume. And we stepped again and it would stop. And then it would resume. And I was just, wow. And it is written that if people will not praise God, then even the rocks will praise him. And I'm just admiring everything. The trees, there's richness in the color that is cannot be found on this earth. And I tried, like I said, I spent years trying to find those shades of colors. I could not find it. I looked up at what was the sky. I glanced up and I was like, wait a minute, where's the sun? Why are there no clouds? I'm thinking that, and then Jesus was just kind of laughing, and his response was, well, there's no need for a sun. The light that I was seeing, he said, this light you see is the light of God that covers and encompasses every single thing. And there's no need for clouds because we don't need rain. We don't need the wind that I was, very soft, gentle breeze that I was feeling on me. Is that's the breath of God that sustains everything. And then I started looking around more closely and I realized that the rocks, you normally see rocks and trees and so on the beaches, and there were no shadows. There were no shadows under the leaves, on the side of the tree, on the side of there was no shadow. And I came to the understanding that the knowingness that there's in the presence of God, there can be no negativity. There can be no negative space. There can be no shadow. There can be no unhappiness, no anger, no pain. It's an impossibility when you're in the presence of Christ. And I was just, I was in awe. And then as a fleeting thought, I thought of my kids. It wasn't like, oh, my kids, I was not in anguish. It was a thought like, oh, I had this for breakfast. Inconsequential. So there was no pain attached to it. But the Lord knew I thought of my children. And he was like, you would like to go back to your children. And for some reason, I said, yes, I would. But I didn't say, again, there was no anguish attached to that statement. I just simply said yes. And he said, why? He asked me why. I said, well, Lord, I'll like to see them grow up. I'd like to take care of them, love them. And again, no sadness attached to that. And he's like, but don't you trust me? And that's when I had to stop and think. And I realized who's better to take care of my most beloved children than Christ himself? And I said, yes, Lord, I do trust you. Because all of a sudden there was this innate understanding of time and the fact that it does not exist. And what I would see as, oh, I'm being taken away from my children was really the blink of an eye in heaven. And I knew they'd be back with me. So I said, yes, Lord. I gave them over to him. I literally let go of my children. And mothers out there, parents, you know how difficult that is. Just to have your kids leave the house is, challenging. I let go of my kids and I put them in God's hands. And I think that's the reason they were given back to me, because I trusted the Lord enough to release them. And we continued walking along the beach, and there was this more brilliant white light directly in front of me. And I'm like, what? I'm a little bit confused. And then there was just a voice emanating from that light. It was the voice of God. Because as you know, we believe in God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. And that voice was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Even more beautiful than Jesus's voice. which I've come to know very, very well. It was a combination of a hurricane. This is the best that I can describe. Combination of a hurricane, the gushing winds, crashing waves, the trickle of a gentle trickle of a stream, but it was all wrapped in this deep, thunderous, yet soft sound. I don't know how else to describe it. There was so many paradoxes in his voice. And I thought it was so beautiful. And the Lord said, my voice is the sweetest sound you will ever hear. But to those who do not belong to me, it will be the worst sound they will ever hear. And I knew that meant judgment. Um, and then the Lord said, you wish to go back to your children. And again, I said, yes. And I'm like, why am I saying yes, you know? And he said, I will let you go back to them, but you must, and there's this list. You must do da 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 for me. And immediately I agreed. I was like, okay, yes, Lord, I will do everything you ask. And at the top of that list was this book called Bare Feet. He showed me this book in like it was like 3D. I saw the cover, I saw the font style, the name, the everything. I saw everything the way it was supposed to say. And he said, do not deviate from that. And I said, yes, Lord, I'll do that. And he said, don't worry about where you will find the strength or the words. I will provide. And just as quickly as he appeared, the voice left, and so did the light. And Jesus was so happy. Oh my God. People have this image of him, all stoic and, you know, he's so not like that. I mean, he can be, but he has an amazing sense of humor. And he's just kind of happy-go-lucky guy. And he hugged me and he kissed my head all over and he swung me around in the air. Yeah, you're going back home. And he just, he held me there and he said, don't worry, everything will be fine. And he placed his hand on my head, and there was an intense heat that ran through my body. But as intense as it was not painful. And there was a knowingness that he was cleansing me from every STD, HIV, anything and everything that I could have possibly contracted. He was healing my body through my spirit. And when he was done, I just, we just walked back the same way that we came. But for whatever reason, I tried to look back because I could not look back. It was impossible. Like I literally could not turn my head back. And we walked, and I remember him just smiling at me and swinging hands. And we got to where we began on the beach. And Jesus said, everything will be fine. I will be with you. And there on my left side, I saw the saints. There was Abraham, Moses, Jacob, Isaac, Isaiah, and Mother Mary, who I have a very special relationship with, Mother Mary.
What did she
And
look like, Debbie?
oh, I have her image posted on my website, debbieali.com. It was not the images that I grew up seeing, let me put it that way. Her likeness it was just a simple glow, warm, motherly glow about her. Brown eyes, she had a shawl over her head. All the other saints, though, their heads were covered and their heads were bent, and they were praying, as she was as well. But she was the only one that looked up at me, and she smiled what I refer to as a mother's smile, a mother's love. And she said, her message to the world was, God always answers the prayer of a mother. And I knew that that was very, very important. That's when I realized it was not just my prayer for my children, but it was my mother's prayer for me that God heard and granted me the opportunity to come back, which sometimes, well, not sometimes, very often I kick myself. Why I should have stayed. I so should have stayed. This world is not pleasant. Um, And then she bowed her head again in prayer. And the saints they were all praying. I couldn't distinguish what they were saying, but I knew they were in prayer. And I stood there, Jesus is standing behind me, and then boom, on the left side is Archangel Michael. He just drops like this solid, massive, metallic being. And the Lord says to me, Michael will be with you until your work is done on the earth. You will always be safe. Call on him when you need him. And then just as heavily, Archangel Gabriel drops on my right side, and the Lord says, whenever you need wisdom and guidance, you can feel free to call on Gabriel. He will come until your work is done. And I'm like, I felt so secure. I felt so secure. And these angels are not the way we portray them to children, with the airy fairy wings and the halo and all of that. Mm-mm. They're seriously like badass, like they mean business kind of stuff, right? That's a whole other story. My relationship with Michael is extremely close, always has been, as I came to realize after. And yeah, and then I knew that they would be with me, and I suddenly just felt really, really tired. And I curled up on the sand in a fetal position, hands crossed and everything. And I remember my journey back to my body. I was flying, dancing, and skipping through air and time and space and everything in between time and space. And I could have explored the galaxies with the speed of thought if I wanted to. But my journey was back to my body. And the next thing I know, I'm back in this sack with this first gasp of air that was extremely painful. And, all the pain in my body, everything came back. And, but I knew that I was going to be released and I knew that I would be okay. And so there was no more fear. There was no more of anything except expectation of when my freedom will come. And sure enough, they accepted a minute portion of the ransom. Police were flabbergasted, one, that I was even alive after 5 days, and two, that having kept me for 2 weeks, these criminals would accept like 100th of what they asked for. That has never happened, so they called me the miracle, right? Which I was. And so I was released on the 19th of December, very, very early in the morning. The keeper came in. He said, listen, we've accepted the money and whatever, you're going home to your kids. And he was so happy. But before he left, he asked me if he could have my scapular, which I always wear. I always wear it. And there's Jesus and Mother Mary here. And I'm like, why do you want that? Because it's really just a string with two little plastic pictures on it. And he's like, I'll keep this with me. And I will always remember that it's not too late to change and I can be saved. And he refused to take it off my neck. He wanted me to take it off and give it. And I did. I took it off and I put it in his hand and he called me his friend and he kissed my hand and he said, you're going home to your babies now. And his secret plan was to give me back my phone, the phone that they stole from me when the men entered my house. That's against the rules. They don't do that, right? They just drop you off at a random spot and that's it. He said, I'm going to give you your phone while he's in the backseat of the car with me. He said, just hide it. And the reason he did that is he said, you know the keypad on your phone. Call your husband as soon as we drop you off. And I'm like, I didn't say anything. And so in the car, he did just that. He loosened my mask a little bit, which he was not supposed to do. So I could get it off easily because it was duct taped onto my head. And that cut off circulation to a lot as well. So he loosened my mask and he slipped me the phone in my hand. And they threw me out on the street in Port of Spain, Trinidad, and left. And, I always tell people I was released, but that's when my horror story began. Really, that's where it began. And, police eventually located me. I called my husband, and there was nothing like the sound of his voice. A familiar voice, and they were able to locate me, and they bagged me, tagged me, and forensics, everything. And, again, like I said, that's where the horror story began. The recovery, and the doctors were flabbergasted because they examined me. They found, a bunch of bruises and injuries and all of that. But they're like, we have to run tests, STDs, HIV. And remember the doctor, I forgot his name. He said, "No, Mrs. Ali, there is a 98% chance that you do have HIV," because remember they had me for 2 weeks, "and whatever other STDs." And I just said, okay, because I knew that when Jesus blessed me, there was nothing left in my body. But, my husband, everybody needed to know. They ran their tests. Everything came back negative. They were what? Never happened before. So the doctors were confused. The police was confused. Everybody was confused about what happened to me because it was, in fact, a miracle. And that's when maybe about 6 months after my release, I started working on the book, Bare Feet. And of course, God's message to the world is, I see all, I hear all, I know all that happens in the darkness and the light, and I save. And I'm supposed to be living proof that He saves. So yeah, there you have it.
Debbie, thank you so much for that story in terms of the trauma you had to endure. Your story reminds us of the power of total surrender because you surrendered in that room where you were held, and also you surrendered with Christ in giving up your children. Um, and then in the power of total forgiveness as well. It
Yeah, and I
is,
always say that was not me, that was all Christ. That was all the Lord.
yeah.
Yeah.
And thank you for taking the courage to share your story as well, because it, it is empowering that we, as dehumanizing, and you were able to disassociate from the trauma that you were undergoing, that having that faith and communicating with God, because I think I remember hearing you say that it was because you were praying that the keeper decided to ask you about Christ and about your prayers. So imagine it touched even someone like him who was committing such, a horrible crime at the time. Um, what was the reunion like with your children and family?
Oh, emotional does not be, that's so inadequate. It was it was gut-wrenching for me to reunite with my husband. Because he came to the hospital. I did not want my kids there at all. Um, I heard his voice. When I heard his voice, I just started crying because I knew he was like right in the next room, and it was gut-wrenching because I had been debating should I tell him I was raped or not, because I knew that would devastate him. But I can't lie. I'm not one of those people who can just lie. And he came in and he looked at me, and I knew that was, yeah, no, he wanted to ask me. And I told him, and he fell to the floor in grief, you know. Because rape does not just destroy the woman, it destroys the entire, by extension, everyone she loves. And with my children, I was just, oh my gosh, I kissed every part of them that I could find when they saw me. They knew it was me, but it didn't look like me because remember I had been starved and dehydrated. I was in a mess. I wore, like a long t-shirt, long pants, so they wouldn't see the bruises and scratches and all of that. So they were like almost like little puppies. They were kind of like sniffing their way, like this is mom, but it's not mom. And then they kind of finally realized, okay, it really was me, and I just cried. I just cried and I held them, man. I couldn't let them go for a long time, a long time. But I've had to hide my pain and my suffering over the years. I've had to hide everything from them, the best that I could. I've had to hide it from my parents, my husband, especially, my brother, everybody. I've had to hide it from everybody because one, I knew they couldn't help me, and two, I knew they couldn't relate to it. So I hid it and I suffered on my own and tried to figure my way through it on my own. When I say on my own, I mean the Lord was with me every step of the way, but I had to kind of navigate on my own. It was, it has been very, very difficult, and there's no getting over that. That kind of trauma, that kind of abuse, you don't get over it. That follows you for the rest of your life. And it's an ongoing battle. I will not lie. It's an ongoing battle.
I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing the story. Debbie,
When I
thank you
go
so
through,
much for
yeah.
being here with me today. I have three questions I ask everyone. What brings you joy and laughter these days?
My children. I mean, they're grown-ups now, but silly little things that they do and they say, and that brings me the most joy. Just seeing them go through their lives and what makes them happy, and that they do. They bring me the most joy. Yeah.
If you can if you can talk to little Debbie, what advice would you give her?
Advice to little Debbie, stay strong.
I
Stay
love that.
strong.
Yeah. And what final message or blessing do you have for those listening?
Oh, remember that there is a God. Whenever you're tempted to think that there's no justice in this world, or life is unfair, or you keep asking God, why this, why that, why the other, just remember the Lord's message. I see all, I hear all, I know all that happens in the darkness and the light, and I save. But He saves when the time is right. We need to be strong until He's ready. Our time is not His time. I felt like I felt like I had spent 10 minutes in heaven. When I got back to my body, an entire day had passed. It was nighttime. So time is a construct. Remember that.
Thank you, Debbie, for spending this time with me today. And I hope everyone enjoyed this and appreciates this as much as I did.